You erased me with a smile and a signature. Did you think I wouldn't notice? I didn't raise my voice. I didn't cry. I just said it like I was reading an old weather report. Something inevitable, already past. Vanessa froze at the end of the hospital hallway, pen still trembling in her fingers, a thin line of blue ink smudged across her knuckles. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. Until I remembered the will tucked inside her jacket, still warm from a hand that had forgotten mine. You erased me with a smile and a signature. Did you think I wouldn't notice? I didn't raise my voice. I didn't cry. I spoke it like a fact, like reading out a weather forecast already written in yesterday's paper. Vanessa froze at the end of the hallway, pen trembling between her fingers, blue ink bleeding onto her skin like guilt refusing to dry. For a second, she seemed smaller than I remembered, but the weight in my chest reminded me some choices stretch far beyond apology, especially when they wear the mask of certainty. The rain hadn't stopped since midnight. Seattle was soaked in a gray so heavy even the hospital lights seemed dimmer. St. Augustine's corridors hummed with low voices and the muted footsteps of people walking toward or away from endings. Room 204 was where my father lay, tethered to oxygen, his chest rising and falling in shallow defiance. Stage 4 lung cancer left no room for illusion. Some mornings, he tried to smile when I squeezed his hand. Most mornings, he just watched me with soft, blurred eyes, the kind of look that said, "I'm already half gone." I was the second daughter, the one who had chosen distance over duty. Vanessa stayed. Vanessa became the fixture in family photos, the emergency contact, the easy answer. I told myself that leaving wasn't betrayal, that life was a river, and some of us had to follow it downstream. I built a life stitched together by independence and quiet victories, far from Sunday dinners and whispered judgments. Yet somewhere deep inside, hope lingered. Hope that when it mattered most, love would be measured not by presence, but by recognition. I clung to that hope until it dissolved between the cracks of a hospital door left slightly ajar. I hadn't meant to listen. I hadn't meant to hear the words that would pull the ground from under me. I arrived earlier than usual, footsteps soft against the worn linoleum, rainwater dripping from my sleeves. The nurses weren't done with their rounds. I paused, maybe out of habit, maybe out of instinct, and heard Vanessa's voice. Soft, careful, edged with urgency. "This is the updated version. I only fixed a few things for you, Dad." My heart skipped once, then twice. Then came her next words, threaded with justification. "Just sign. June won't mind. You know she doesn't need as much." The silence that followed was thick, broken only by the scrape of pen against paper. I stood there, my breath caught somewhere between my ribs and my throat, feeling something unravel quietly inside me. It wasn't about the Capitol Hill condo. It wasn't about the savings. It was about erasure. Clean, polite, complete. It was about learning that even at the end, when everything should have narrowed to what mattered most, I was still seen as an afterthought, strong enough to survive being forgotten. I didn't walk into the room. I didn't demand answers. I turned away, one step at a time, until the door was a shadow behind me. I found myself standing in front of a vending machine, staring at rows of plastic-wrapped sugar, my hands cold and numb. I dropped a coin into the slot, just to hear it fall. Just to hear something obey gravity, something make sense. Vanessa's voice echoed in my head, an accusation wrapped in pity. She doesn't need as much. Later, I sat in my car, the rain blurring the world into something softer and crueler. I didn't start the engine. I didn't touch the radio. I just sat there, hands gripping the wheel, letting the betrayal sink in. Not the loud kind. The kind that leaves bruises and broken dishes. This was the quieter kind. The kind you carry like a second heartbeat, steady and invisible, until one day it breaks you wide open. I tried to forgive her in my mind. I tried to imagine she meant well, that she thought she was protecting me from burden, from complication. But even the most generous retelling ended in the same place. I wasn't considered. I wasn't consulted. I wasn't counted. When I was younger, I thought love was measured by grand gestures. who remembered birthdays, who hugged tighter. But now I knew better. In families, love is measured in consideration. And that day, standing in a gray hospital hallway with the taste of betrayal thick in my mouth, I understood. I hadn't been considered at all. And the next morning, I visited Dad again. I didn't knock. I walked in, like I used to after long semesters away, pretending I still belonged. Vanessa was already there, adjusting pillows, pouring water. She smiled at me, tight, careful. I smiled back, loose, hollow. We moved around each other like satellites of different planets, speaking only when necessary, orbiting the same man we both loved in ways too complicated to name. I waited until she stepped out to take a call. Then I leaned close to Dad, heart pounding louder than the machines around us. "Do you remember what you signed yesterday?" I asked, voice barely above a whisper. His eyelids fluttered open, confusion clouding his gaze. "Vanessa said you needed help," he murmured. "She changed your will," I said, the words thick as stones. He blinked, slow and deliberate. "She has, Haley. You're fine. You're fine. Not, you matter. Not, you deserve. Just, you're fine." As if resilience was a shield against betrayal. As if survival itself was proof I didn't need fairness. That night, I sat in my apartment, red wine staining the lip of my glass. The original will spread open across my lap. Dad's wishes, simple and fair, staring back at me. Half of everything, a split between two daughters. It was never complicated, until Vanessa decided it should be. I knew what I had to do. I knew there was only one way forward. 2 days after I sat staring at the original will, I showed up at Vanessa's front door. The suburban house she loved so much stood polished and perfect under the soft gloom of another rainy morning. Haley was in the driveway, drawing with sidewalk chalk, her smile wide and innocent. It squeezed something in my chest, but I smiled back, kneeling to hug her tight. "Auntie June," she squealed, and I whispered, "Hey, sweetheart," against her hair, breathing in the scent of rain and childhood. Vanessa appeared on the porch, a steaming mug of tea in her hands like armor. Her smile was polite, but her eyes darted, wary. She knew why I was here. We both did. We sat across from each other in the living room I had once helped her paint, a soft sage green that now felt almost mocking. The air was thick with unspoken history, the clink of ceramic mugs the only punctuation. "You said Dad asked you to update the will," I said, voice even. She tilted her head, too casual. "He did. You changed the distribution?" I pressed. She shrugged. "Only slightly." My stomach twisted. "Vanessa," I said slowly, carefully, "did you forge my signature?" Silence stretched between us, tight and sharp. Then she looked away. "I adapted it." He asked me to help. "Did you forge my signature?" I repeated, not letting her slip away behind half-truths. Her voice dropped to a whisper. "He was sick. It was a mess. You wouldn't have answered your phone." "I would have come," I said, softer than I intended. She shook her head, bitterness rising. "You always leave, June. You're always somewhere else. I stay. I raise my kid. I check on Mom. I drive Dad to chemo. Don't act like you're the one holding things together." I looked at her then, really looked, and for the first time I saw, not malice, not greed, but resentment. She wasn't stealing from me, she was punishing me. Punishing me for choosing freedom when she chose to stay. I didn't cry in Vanessa's living room, not because I wasn't hurt, but because I had nothing left to give her, not even my grief. I nodded slowly, standing up even as my hands shook from the effort of staying calm. "I get it," I said quietly. "You stayed, I left. But none of that gives you permission to decide what I deserve." She flinched, as if struck, but said nothing. I walked toward the door. "I'm requesting a copy of the updated will from Dad's lawyer," I added over my shoulder. Her voice followed me, sharp and pleading. "You're really going to drag this through legal stuff? He's dying, June. Let him have peace." I turned, meeting her gaze without blinking. "Peace doesn't come from lies, Vanessa. It comes from truth. even the ugly kind. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay awake staring at the ceiling, Vanessa's words circling my mind like vultures. You're fine. You always leave. You don't need as much. Being strong had been a badge once, something I wore proudly, but somewhere along the line it had become a sentence. Permission for others to take and leave me standing alone, applauding their need while starving my own. No one had asked if I wanted to be strong. No one had asked if I was tired. They had just assumed I would bear it, because I always had. The next morning, I made the call. Hi, this is June Carter. My father, Thomas Carter, is a client of yours. I'd like to request a copy of any recent documents he's signed, specifically any revisions to his will. The assistant's voice was polite but cautious. You'll need his written permission or power of attorney to access that. I paused, heart pounding. I believe the document may have been altered without proper consent, possibly without full awareness of what he was signing. Silence. Then, let me connect you to Mr. Baird. His voice, when it came, was smooth, practiced, the voice of someone used to tiptoeing around uncomfortable truths. Yes, Miss Carter, we do have an amended version on file, signed earlier this week. I swallowed. Was the signature notarized? A pause. It was witnessed, not notarized. Mr. Carter seemed frail but lucid. Were both daughters present? Another pause. Only Vanessa Carter. My throat tightened. I'd like to see a copy of that signature. Understood. We'll prepare it for review. It may take a day. I hung up, my hands trembling. My shoulders ached as if I had been holding up the sky without realizing it. The weight of being the strong one was heavier than ever. The next day, I drove to the hospital with a printout of the original will folded neatly in my bag. Dad was asleep when I arrived, the rhythmic beeping of his monitors filling the room with a kind of reluctant hope. I sat beside him, watching the frail rise and fall of his chest, the way his hands, once so steady when helping me fix my broken bike as a child, now trembled, even at rest. I thought about the postcards I used to send from college, the ones he never responded to but always tucked into his nightstand. I thought about the quiet pride he carried for both of us, never loudly, but in the small ways that mattered. And I wondered if he even realized what he had signed away. Vanessa arrived later, coffee in hand, smile tight and guarded. We didn't speak. We didn't need to. The silence between us was thick enough to drown in. When the nurse entered and adjusted Dad's IV, she handed Vanessa a folder. The revised will tucked inside like a secret, still pretending it could stay hidden. Vanessa placed it on the side table, avoiding my eyes. I waited. I didn't force it. Some truths don't need they reveal themselves simply by being too heavy to carry quietly. When she left to pick up Haley from school, I reached for the folder. My heart hammered against my ribs, my fingers trembling slightly as I flipped through the pages. And there it was. The signature. At first glance it looked familiar. To someone who didn't know better, it might have passed. But I knew Dad's handwriting the way you know the sound of your own name spoken across a crowded room. The T's were too straight, the loops too tight, the pressure too even. It wasn't his hand. It was a forgery, a desperate, clumsy attempt at rewriting loyalty. I didn't feel anger, not immediately. What I felt was a hollow ache, an exhaustion so deep it felt older than my bones. I placed the papers back exactly as they were and sat by Dad's bedside again, studying the face that had taught me how to ride a bike, how to balance a checkbook, how to patch drywall after a storm. I thought about how he had always trusted me with the messy things, the taxes, the hospital bills, the endless paperwork no one else wanted to touch. But when it came to trust that mattered most, the kind that meant seeing me, choosing me, he had looked the other way. That night, I didn't go home. I drove to Green Lake and walked its perimeter for hours, the rain slicking my hair to my forehead, my jeans sticking cold and wet against my skin. I needed to move. I needed to remember that I still had legs, a spine, a voice. Joggers passed me in the mist, their headlamps cutting brief tunnels of light through the fog. Couples huddled under shared umbrellas. I was alone, but not lonely. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't waiting for anyone to offer me a seat at their table. When I finally got home, I opened a blank document on my laptop. I titled it simply, "The Cost of Silence." And then, word by word, I began to write. I wrote about the will, yes, but also about every smaller erasure that had led to this moment. The holidays I spent flying home alone, the medical bills I paid without thanks, the birthday cards I signed knowing my name would be read last, if at all. I wrote not to accuse, not to hurt, but to remember, because memory was power and silence was the slow, polite death of it. I didn't need vengeance. I didn't need spectacle. What I needed was acknowledgement. Not from them, but from myself. To say, I was here. I mattered. I carried more than anyone realized and survived more than anyone asked. And from that day forward, I would carry it differently. Not as proof of strength they could borrow, but as the foundation of a life built on my own terms. 2 days later, I met Mr. Baird at his downtown office. The wood-paneled walls smelled faintly of old books and the kind of expensive cologne that tried too hard to feel reassuring. He greeted me with a tight, professional smile, the kind that said he knew trouble when he saw it. I placed 2 documents on his polished desk, the original will and the revised one. Side by side, they didn't even pretend to match. Mr. Baird studied them carefully, glasses sliding down his nose. "This may warrant legal review," he said at last, voice careful. "Forgery is a serious matter." I nodded once, steady. "I'm not looking for a war," I said. "Just the truth." That same evening, I returned to the hospital. Vanessa was there, spoon-feeding Dad bites of soup, her voice low and coaxing. I smiled at Dad when he saw me, small but real. I waited until Vanessa stepped out to answer a call, then pulled my chair close to his bed. "I know about the will," I said, voice barely above the will hum of the machines, "and I know you didn't sign it." He stared straight ahead, his hands twitching slightly under the blanket. He didn't deny it. He didn't apologize. His silence said enough. I reached for his hand, warm and frail in mine. "You don't have to fix it now," I whispered. "But I need you to know, silence isn't peace. It's just another way to leave someone behind." 2 more days passed before I called for a family meeting. Sunday afternoon. Clouds heavy and low, pressing the house into a strange, breathless quiet. Mom fussed with a plate of cookies no one touched. Dad sat slumped in his wheelchair, eyes vacant. Uncle Ray agreed to come as a neutral witness. Vanessa stood by the fireplace, arms crossed, face tight. I laid the documents on the coffee table. Original will, amended will, handwriting analysis. The works. I didn't say much. I didn't need to. The evidence spoke louder than anger ever could. Vanessa crumbled first. "I never meant to hurt you," she said, voice cracking under the weight of her own story. "I just thought it was fair." I looked her in the eye, steady. "You didn't ask me what I thought. You decided for me." Mom tried to jump in, soft and scolding. "Girls, please." But I held up a hand. "Let's not call it a misunderstanding. Let's call it what it is, erasure." Dad cleared his throat, voice thin but firm. "It wasn't right," he said. The room stilled. No more denials, no more shifting blame. Just the quiet gravity of truth landing where it belonged. I left that day lighter than I had been in months. Not victorious, not vindicated, just free. Later, Mr. Baird confirmed the amendment would be withdrawn. The original will reinstated. Vanessa sent a message through him, asking if I would consider speaking to her. I stood outside my apartment building that evening, watching the late sun fracture into gold across the wet pavement, and understood something I hadn't before. Forgiveness isn't something you give because someone asks. It's something you choose when you no longer need the apology. 3 days later, Vanessa showed up on my doorstep. She stood there for a long time, coat clutched tight, face pale under the porch light. "I know you probably don't want to see me," she said. "I'm not sure I do," I replied honestly. She looked down at her shoes. I just wanted to thank you for not destroying me. I tilted my head. You think I didn't because I was being kind? She blinked. I smiled sadly. I didn't, because the truth already did enough damage. She nodded, tears shining unshed in her eyes. I thought I was doing what was best for my family. I shook my head gently. You were doing what was best for your family, not ours. Before she left, she asked, voice small, "Do you hate me?" I thought for a long moment. "No," I said finally. "But I don't trust you either." And then, quietly, I closed the door. Not with anger, not with triumph, just with finality. Weeks drifted by like fog across Green Lake. After the meeting, after the will was restored, after Vanessa's quiet retreat from my doorstep, there was a stillness in my life that felt both foreign and necessary. Dad never mentioned the will again. In our last visits, there was only the familiar, heavy silence of a man nearing the edge of the world. Vanessa stopped coming by the hospital as often. Her texts arrived in stilted bursts, photos of Haley, awkward updates about Mom. I replied with emojis, a few words here and there. It was easier that way. Easier to keep the distance without building new walls. 3 weeks after the confrontation, Dad passed away. It was a Tuesday night, just after midnight, the hospital corridors half lit and half asleep. I was reading a novel in the corner of his room when the monitor began to slow, the beeps stretching farther and farther apart until they faded into a long, unbroken silence. I set the book down and took his hand in mine, holding it until the warmth slipped away. There were no last words, no grand declarations, just a long exhale, and then, peace. I kissed his forehead, whispered, "You did your best," and stood up, feeling the weight of a chapter ending not with fireworks, but with a sigh. The funeral was simple, understated. Black umbrellas bloomed like dark flowers against the Seattle drizzle. White lilies lined the altar. The priest mispronounced Vanessa's name and mine without apology. I didn't cry, not when Mom leaned against me, seeking comfort, not when Vanessa sniffled behind her tissue, not even when they lowered the casket into the ground. My grief didn't need ceremony. It lived in quieter places. The soft click of Dad's old lighter still in my jacket pocket, the worn leather of his notebook tucked into my bag. 3 days after the funeral, I found myself in Dad's garage. Dust floated in shafts of light slicing through the half-open door. His tools hung neatly on the walls, untouched since the last storm he patched the roof after. In the back corner, tucked behind a stack of old gardening pots, I found a cardboard box labeled June College in Dad's shaky handwriting. Inside were all the postcards I'd sent over the years, every letter, every photo I thought had been forgotten. At the very bottom, a worn graduation photo, creased at the edges but carefully saved. He had kept them all. My breath hitched, and, for the first time since his death, I let myself cry, not for what had been lost, but for what had always quietly remained. Mom tried to pull us back together after Dad's passing. Dinner invitations, group chats filled with polite emojis, even a suggestion to do a memory night to honor Dad. I declined each time, not out of anger, not out of punishment, just clarity. I was done shrinking myself to fit into a mold I never chose, done chasing scraps of recognition disguised as family duty, done pretending that being the strong one meant accepting being invisible. Strength, I realized, wasn't about endurance. It was about choice. And I chose to step away. I took a sabbatical from work, rented a small cabin on Orcas Island, surrounded by fog, seagulls, and the quiet lull of ocean breath. I brought only what I needed, a few books, my journal, and a kettle for tea. The first morning, I woke to the sound of rain tapping the windows. No emails, no phone calls, no reminders of the life I had left suspended back on the mainland. I wrapped myself in a wool blanket, sat by the window, and watched the tide come and go, each wave erasing itself clean. I cooked slow meals. I took walks barefoot through the wet grass. I wrote letters I never sent. And with each passing day, the noise in my head dulled until all that was left was the steady rhythm of my own heartbeat. One evening, sitting on the porch with a mug of chamomile tea, I pulled out my journal and wrote a single sentence. I am not responsible for their peace. The words settled into my bones with a finality I hadn't realized I was still waiting for. I wasn't built to carry the guilt of other people's choices. I wasn't made to absorb the echoes of their disappointment or sacrifice my worth for their comfort. I was allowed to exist on my own terms, to live a life shaped by joy and boundaries, not by duty and silence. Vanessa sent one last message that fall. It arrived quietly, tucked between spam emails and online shopping receipts. I'm sorry. For everything. I thought you didn't care. I was wrong. I see you now. I read it twice. Saved it, did not respond. Forgiveness, I had learned, wasn't a transaction. It wasn't something owed or expected. It was a quiet, private decision. A door you closed for yourself, not for anyone else. Maybe one day I would answer her. Maybe not. But today I was free. Winter came soft and gray in Portland. I found a tiny apartment above a bookstore that smelled like cinnamon and old stories. The floors creaked with every step and the windows let in more cold than they should have. But it was mine. I furnished it with second-hand treasures, a scarred oak table, a velvet armchair that swallowed me whole, a chipped teapot that whistled like a tired bird. Every piece carried a history someone else left behind. And somehow, that made them feel more honest. I wasn't building a life that looked good on paper. I was building one that felt good, in the quiet of my own chest. Sundays became sacred. I would take myself out for coffee, stroll down rain-damp streets, breathe in the scent of wet earth and hope. I learned the names of the baristas, the stray cat who haunted the bookstore's stoop, the old man who played chess with himself by the park fountain. None of them knew the story I carried. None of them cared. I was just June. No baggage, no unfinished conversations hanging between handshakes. In that anonymity was a kind of healing I hadn't known I needed. I started therapy. The real kind, the kind where you don't just talk about fixing what's broken, but about learning how not to apologize for the spaces you take up. My therapist asked me once, gently, "What does belonging mean to you?" I sat with the question for a long time, tracing the word with my thumb against the worn arm of the couch. Belonging, I realized, wasn't about being invited. It was about no longer waiting for permission to stay. I planted a small garden on my fire escape. Just herbs at first, then cherry tomatoes, then wildflowers that stubbornly bloomed even when the city air tried to choke them. Watching something grow without anyone's approval felt like reclaiming a part of myself I didn't even know had been fenced off. Every morning, I would water them with a chipped mug that said, "Kind, not compliant," and somewhere between mint sprigs and sun-warmed petals, I remembered what it felt like to nurture without erasing myself. Sometimes Vanessa's messages still came, short, hesitant, like tapping on a door she wasn't sure she was allowed to open. I read them. Sometimes I smiled. Sometimes I felt nothing. I didn't answer, not because I hated her, not because I wanted her to hurt, but because healing isn't always loud. Sometimes it's just choosing not to reopen wounds that finally stopped bleeding. One Sunday, while sipping coffee on a park bench, I watched two sisters chasing each other through fallen leaves. Their laughter floated through the air, light and reckless. I smiled, not because I missed what I never had, but because I had built something different, something quieter, sturdier, a life that didn't hinge on anyone else's recognition. I used to think losing my family meant losing myself, but it didn't. I simply stopped being the version of myself they were comfortable using. And in doing so, I found something infinitely more precious. Myself. Full. Unapologetic. Quietly powerful. No longer the strong one for others. No longer the silent one hoping to be seen. Just June? Enough?